Okay. Next up is the Primal Hunter, a LitRPG written by Zogarth. It is 716 pages. It is $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. On just another average day, Jake finds himself in a forest filled with monsters, dangers, and opportunity. It was a day like any other when suddenly the world changed. The universe reached a threshold humanity didn't even know existed, and it was time to finally be integrated into the vast multiverse, a place where power is the only thing anyone can truly rely on. Jake, a seemingly average office worker, finds himself thrust into this new world, in a tutorial filled with dangers and opportunities. His new reality should breed fear and concern. His fellow coworkers falter at every turn. Jake, however, finds himself thriving. Perhaps in this new world, Jake was meant to be born in. Perhaps this is the world Jake was meant to be born in. Okay. That's actually a really good novel description of the setup of the novel. The beginning of the story is a little bit rough, I would say. It's not the most engaging. A group of people from Earth are transported into an RPG fantasy tutorial for the apocalypse. It's a simple setup. And it gets right to the point really quickly. The main character is an antisocial and hard to like character, though he is easy to sympathize. I think that's probably the part that I think, if you're going to have an issue with it, that's probably about the point you are in wanting to care about the main character and envisioning him and liking him a little bit. For me, it wasn't necessarily a like him. I found him sympathetic, but harder to like because he's presented as this almost sociopathic or more like amoral, in that he thrives in the tutorial environment because he's good at archery and he's willing to kill monsters and even humans, and he doesn't really have any qualms about it. And for a group of individuals who's just normal people from our society, that creates more conflicts for a lot of the other people in the group. And so again, character to sympathize with, but it's hard to like at the first, in the very beginning of it. Eventually that character is developed more. And so it's easier as the story goes on to like him and to be interested in, to be engaged in wanting him to win. That does develop eventually. So good stuff there, I guess. About 30% in, the story actually takes a pretty, I want to say, significant shift in the pacing of the story, because up until that point, the first 30% really does focus on a very overpowered main character. And again, this is part of the serial nature of this series, in that you're going to have these different shifts sometimes in the storytelling, because the author is putting out chunks by chapter of what's happening in the story, and it continues on until the author gets bored or just wants to change the pacing, and the story shifts again, and that's perfectly valid. So the first 30% is really like almost a solo adventure story, or the story of this main character who's a little bit overpowered compared to his other compatriots because he's willing to kill. He's okay with killing monsters. He has an advantage, several advantages that are presented to him. And that helps him gain levels faster than anybody else. And then in 30% in, again, the story shifts, kind of pushing the main character on a surprising crafting journey and adventure. And I was genuinely surprised, because up until this point, crafting hadn't been mentioned at all, any way, shape, or form. And the main character kind of gets his opportunity to grow with this. I'm not going to say what it is because it's not mentioned anywhere. I don't want to spoil anything, but he does go on this crafting side journey for a good, 30% of the novel, where he's on his own. And the author takes that opportunity essentially to level up the other characters, develop other characters besides him, in creating either potential allies or potential adversaries for the main character, developing other factions, other things that are happening in this tutorial, other world, but mostly just getting them their levels, so they're again a challenge for the main character. This is very much as that opportunity of this thing where the author probably saw, if this main character keeps loving more than anybody else, nobody's going to be able to oppose him. It's going to be a very boring story. And so he kind of took a pause in getting the main character to do crafting so that everybody else can catch up or even advance past our main character, so that he, again, is challenged when she comes out of that crafting thing. The crafting thing by itself is very entertaining. I thought it was really well done. I thought there's a nice little level of detail in doing these things. And it's not a waste of time for the main character or the story. He does use this opportunity later on to to solve problems, to become core, could have unique class advancements. So it's not a waste or anything. It's just, it's a particular choice. And I liked it because I like crafting. Other people may not enjoy it as much if they don't like crafting as much. But even if you don't, there are other like little, I want to say side stories from other points of views from other characters where they're doing their own character, where they're doing their own adventure, their own interpersonal and group politics or intrigue things that I think are going to be nicely, but they're mostly developed as either antagonists for their characters, including like a true sociopathic character. On the RPG side of things, nicely done here. Very, I think, satisfying for anybody who likes a crunchy story. There's a clear multi-layered system for progression, combat classes, level, as do people's races, the human race, and eventually their crafting professions. So they're like there are three class structures or three progression structures that progress. Each level adds to a person's stats, give them choices for powers, abilities, and skills, and there's enough variety that a person can kind of theory craft their own classes and think, I would choose this instead of this because I'm going to combo with this other ability. And anytime you get a reader to do that, they're engaged with the story. So that's done very well here. Crafting is also really well done, which I already kind of mentioned. And again, there's enough challenges in the story that it's never boring, even the crafting section of it, and that the main character is eventually challenged enough so that he's not good at anything, with the exception of archery, without working hard for it. So there is a nice feeling of satisfaction when the main character eventually does progress in his class and his other abilities because he finally does have challenges. So good stuff there as well. One of the only, I say, minorly annoying parts for me was probably the ending of the story. I'm not going to say what happens, of course. It's more in the issue of like, this is a serial story, and you can tell with the last ending of it, the last 10% in a traditional 3 or 4 act structure, you'd be tying things off at the end to make everything very satisfying. And in a serial story, not the case. It just isn't. These stories are sometimes hundreds of chapters long, and the story is just up and down of like conflict, relaxing, and other things happening, world building, whatever. And it just continues on until, something happens, and the story can take very wild turns sometimes. And that definitely is the case here in the last 10%. There's not really a resolution to many of the conflicts that have been set up. I was genuinely expecting, we have all these characters developed, we have these antagonists push up, they're going to come to some big head at the very end and, have some big thing. And that doesn't happen. It sort of happens. I'm not going to spoil how, but it doesn't involve the main character. So eventually when the story gets to the end, it's like, you can see that there's some setup for developing other specific characters, but there wasn't that big conclusion of anything being resolved in some of the storylines that I was hoping for. It just kind of, we're going to pause here, continue this adventure in the next book. And that's very much the nature of a serial story, and that's okay. But again, I don't want you to have expectations of a different kind of ending and be disappointed, because otherwise, very entertaining story. Once it again added more complex antagonists, more character development for the other characters, it got very interesting, and I had a good time with it. So overall, there's good action, there's a nice tight pacing for regular action in the story, in addition to crafting and character development and some intrigue, conflict between groups. So all that's nicely done. For me, again, it loses a couple decimals just because of the pausing end instead of an actual big resolution. But that's kind of it. For me, it gets to go 7.6 out of 10. That's still a fine review score. I had a good above average entertaining time with it. I would read the second book when it comes out eventually. That's Primal Hunter, a LitRPG adventure with a score of 7.6 out of 10.